For decades, Iran and Israel have waged a shadow war, proxies, cyber attacks, assassinations, always stopping short of open conflict. The 1979 Iranian Revolution turned former allies into bitter enemies, fueling over 40 years of hostility. In 2024, direct military exchanges shattered the taboo of confrontation, signaling a terrifying new phase. The ongoing Gaza war and regional instability made a single miscalculation enough to ignite a wider conflict. As diplomatic efforts collapsed and both sides issued final warnings, the world watched the last threads of peace snap. Yesterday, the shadow war erupted into open warfare, and the consequences are only beginning to unfold. For decades, Iran's nuclear program has been a flashpoint in international relations, fueling suspicion and anxiety across the globe. The world has watched closely as Iran's ambitions have grown, with many fearing the potential consequences of a nuclear-armed Iran. The stakes have always been high, not just for the Middle East, but for global security as a whole. In 2015, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, offered a glimmer of hope. The deal imposed strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanctions relief, and for a brief period tensions eased. But in 2018 the US unilaterally withdrew from the agreement, shattering diplomatic progress and reigniting old fears. In response, Iran accelerated its uranium enrichment, surpassing previous limits and alarming the international community. Israel in particular viewed these developments as a direct threat to its existence, prompting emergency meetings and heightened security measures. Multiple rounds of negotiations followed, but deep mistrust and rigid demands doomed the talks. The US insisted Iran halt all enrichment, while Iran demanded relief from crippling sanctions. Neither side was willing to compromise, and the window for diplomacy closed. The International Atomic Energy Agency soon issued a damning censure, accusing Iran of serious violations. Instead of backing down, Iran doubled down, installing advanced centrifuges, expanding facilities, and pushing its program further than ever before. For Israel, these actions crossed a red line. The government saw no choice but to prepare for the worst. Meanwhile, Iranian leaders, buoyed by national pride and defiance, refused to yield to international pressure. With diplomacy in ruins and nuclear ambitions unchecked, the world edged closer to conflict. The collapse of talks and the hardening of positions left war looming on the horizon, as hope for a peaceful resolution faded away. In the tense days leading up to the outbreak of war, both Iran and Israel made their intentions unmistakably clear to the world. The air was thick with anticipation, as leaders on both sides issued stern warnings and the international community watched with growing alarm. Iran responded with a show of force, staging massive military drills across the country. Ballistic missiles rolled through city streets and drones soared overhead during high-profile exercises. Iranian commanders declared that any Israeli attack would be met with overwhelming and devastating retaliation, promising to strike not just military targets but also to inflict pain on those supporting Israel. Meanwhile, Israel, convinced that the threat from Iran was not just rhetoric but a looming reality, moved swiftly to ready its military. Air defense systems like the Iron Dome were placed on high alert, and fighter jets stood by for rapid deployment. Israeli leaders made it clear they were prepared to act alone if necessary, determined to protect their nation at any cost. The stakes escalated further when Iranian officials warned that any American intervention would bring US military bases in the region into the crosshairs. This threat raised the specter of a much wider conflict, one that could quickly engulf the entire Middle East and draw in global powers. Inside Israel, government officials held urgent security meetings. The Prime Minister addressed the nation and the world, arguing that inaction was the greater risk. With Iran's nuclear program advancing rapidly, Israeli leaders believed there was no time left to wait or rely on diplomacy. Years of intelligence gathering, covert operations, and meticulous planning had led to this moment. In war rooms filled with maps and satellite images, military strategists weighed their options. The decision was stark: strike first, or risk facing a nuclear-armed adversary in the near future. As both sides mobilized troops and moved equipment toward the borders, the momentum toward open conflict became unstoppable. The world held its breath, knowing that the choices made in these final hours would shape the fate of the region for years to come. The US faced a dilemma: support Israel or avoid a new Middle East war. While calling for restraint, The administration quietly prepared for fallout, evacuating personnel and putting forces on alert. President Trump's comments signaled reluctant acceptance of Israel's actions, even as the White House urged diplomacy. American demands for zero enrichment cornered Iran, while unwavering support emboldened Israel. The U.S. became a concerned spectator, its failed diplomacy helping create the vacuum war now fills. As the first strikes hit, Washington faced hard choices: support Israel, protect its own, and try to contain a spiraling conflict. In Tehran and Tel Aviv, daily life was a tense mix of routine and dread. Beneath the surface of ordinary activities, shopping, commuting, meeting friends, anxiety simmered, coloring every interaction. People tried to hold on to normalcy, but the threat of violence was never far from their minds. Iranians remembered the horrors of past wars. Memories of loss and sacrifice lingered in the air, shaping conversations and daily choices. The scars of history were visible in the faces of elders and in the quiet reverence at war memorials. Israelis braced for direct attacks, running drills and preparing shelters. Families stocked up on essentials, teaching children how to respond to sirens, and neighbors checked in on each other, forging bonds in the face of uncertainty. When war erupted, anxiety turned to chaos: sirens, shelters, and the constant hum of military jets. Streets emptied in moments, and the night sky was often lit by the flash of distant explosions, a stark reminder of the conflict's reach. In Israel, unity mixed with fear as families huddled indoors, awaiting news. Parents tried to reassure their children, but the tension was palpable, and every update brought new waves of worry. In Iran, defiance on state media masked deep public dread. Official broadcasts spoke of resilience, but on the streets, uncertainty and fear were written on every face. Years of hardship now threatened to worsen. Markets grew quieter, shelves emptied, and the weight of sanctions and conflict pressed down on daily life, making survival even more challenging. Hopes for diplomacy vanished, replaced by the grim reality of survival. The optimism of peace talks faded, leaving only the stark choices of endurance and adaptation. For ordinary people, leaders' decisions meant only one thing: a terrifying struggle to endure. Families clung to each other, drawing strength from small acts of kindness and solidarity, even as fear threatened to overwhelm them. The human cost of war became heartbreakingly real overnight. Hospitals filled with the wounded, families mourned lost loved ones, and communities gathered in candlelight vigils, united in grief and hope for peace. The Iran-Israel war is a global crisis, not just a regional one. Oil prices soared, markets tumbled, and vital shipping lanes faced disruption. Iran's proxies across the Middle East threatened to widen the conflict, while U.S. bases braced for attack. The risk of escalation potentially drawing in the U.S., Russia, and China has never been higher. Diplomacy has failed, but the world must find a way back from the brink. The war will reshape the Middle East for generations, forging new alliances and enmities. The question now: can the world step back from the abyss before it's too late?